and hop directly into the topic of the week. This week, President Trump declared the opioid crisis to be a national health emergency. Now, to put some context around there are national emergencies, which give communities access to about a $50 billion fund to address those national emergencies. And then there are health emergencies, which give you about a $50,000 pot to dip into. There isn't a such thing as a national public health emergency. So it's uncertain what this declaration from the president actually means. But what's important is for us to dive in where the opioid crisis came from and what we need to do to get out of it, and comparing it to what has happened in other public health drug emergencies. Let's remember that opioids have been around for thousands of years. Opium has been around in ancient India and ancient China. When the British were invading China, they started the Opium Wars, where they got the population addicted to opium and made it easier for them to establish rule in the area. Opium dens were often associated with Chinese immigrants to the United States and were used derisively and as a means to control those populations. But the current opioid epidemic started in the late 90s when companies started marketing OxyContin and other powerful painkillers as being non-addictive. Because of this, doctors prescribed them in high numbers, prices rose, and we needed a new supply of opium. Conveniently, on 9/11, a country or a group invaded us that had vague ties to Afghanistan, the world's leading producer of opium. And then we embarked on a 14-year war in Afghanistan. And suddenly, opium supplies opened up. Because instead of the Taliban and the Mujahideen, the religious clerics being in charge of Afghanistan who curtailed opium production, now the Karzai government and pro-capitalist, pro-Western governments were in charge, and opium flowed freely out of Afghanistan into the world markets. With this, the price to produce opium dropped and the supply increased. And suddenly, 15 years after invading Afghanistan, opium is ravaging the United States of America. Now, besides the supply and demand issue, we have to also look at the economic parts of it. Because after World War II, the United States was left as being the only industrialized nation that was still intact. England was destroyed by the Blitz. France was invaded by the Nazis. Germany was bombed out of existence. Stalingrad, Leningrad destroyed Russia. The Japanese invaded China. Japan itself was hit by 2 atomic bombs. Every industrialized nation on the earth was destroyed except for the United States of America. In addition, the United States had ramped up production and manufacturing to defeat the Nazis with the arsenal of democracy. And we kept that manufacturing going because we had to supply the world and rebuild the entire world as the only industrialized nation left. This created a standard of living in the 1950s for white America, which had been unseen before. So when we talk about the grand old party, we talk about making America great again. We're talking about going back to that period of time, that Pax Americana, when everybody had great manufacturing jobs, where the GI or retired GIs had money to burn, where suburbs like Levittown were popping up everywhere. But this was unsustainable because as the rest of the world rebuilt and advanced, they were able to cast off legacy infrastructure, legacy technologies, and innovate and move forward. So as the rest of the world caught up, America fell behind. So those manufacturing jobs that existed because the rest of the world couldn't manufacture, they left, and they're never coming back. So what happened was white America was lied to. They were told that, well, you're going to live better than your parents. You're going to make more money than your parents. You're going to have more opportunities. You can work in the same coal mine and live up to the same standard that they lived in the 1950s, and that just doesn't exist anymore. Because of this, economic depression swept over much of the Midwest and Middle America, the Rust Belt, the economic belts of the nation, with no solution. So you add in newfound widespread poverty and a new supply of cheap opium coming in after we just so happened to invade the country with the most opium in the world, right when more opium-based drugs were being created. This created the perfect cocktail for white America to fall into this opium epidemic. And this isn't a solely white America problem, but a very strange conflagration of lack of insurance and racism helped to save much of Black America from the opioid crisis. Many African Americans, simply put, didn't have health insurance. Because of that lack of health insurance, often when individuals underwent surgeries or if they needed painkillers, they were prescribed ibuprofen, 600 milligrams, about all you could get. But they weren't prescribed the heavy doses of opioids that other groups were. They didn't have the money for it. In addition, racist doctors believed, and this was an article in Vox this week, believed that Black and Latino communities were more likely to become addicted to those substances and sell those substances on the open market. Therefore, they wouldn't prescribe them to Black and Latino communities. And this is why they avoided the brunt of the opioid crisis. So a perfect confluence came together to create the current crisis that we have in white America with the opioid epidemic. And I practice law in many outlying counties. If you go to Newton County or Coweta County or Butts County, the courtroom is just filled with young white people with addiction issues, addictions to methamphetamines, addictions to opioids, addictions to painkillers, and with no economic ability to escape this syndrome. This is why the American government is now addressing it. But the reason that it's being treated differently than the way the crack epidemic was handled in the 1980s, or the way the heroin epidemic was handled in the 60s and 70s, is because now it hits close to home. It's easy for Nancy Reagan to say, just say no, when it's not hitting her in her backyard. Because as with all epidemics, it may start with the poor, it may start with the lower classes and the disenfranchised, but it's worked its way up from the trailer parks to the suburbs, from the low-income areas to the high-rises. Now, white America is dealing with these drug addiction issues in their backyard, in their houses, in their bedrooms, in their parlors. And because of that, now we are realizing that, guess what? The hard line, lock 'em up technique does not work to cure addicts. And all we're asking for is that the same soft hand that we're using to address opium addicts be applied to African Americans who have been locked up for 30 years on drug charges. Be applied to all those communities of color who were destroyed by the crack cocaine epidemic of the 80s and 90s. That we realize we have to stop diverting funds away from fighting hard drugs and release individuals who are in jail right now because of marijuana and other non-narcotic substances. So this is a fight that we have to have. We can't blame the past. We can't let the past hold back our progress in the future. We have to fight this battle together. It's not a white people versus Black people issue. It is a government understanding the needs of the American people issue. And together, we can fight this crisis back and save individuals from themselves. I want to hear what you guys have to say. Call in 404-892-2703, News and Talk 1380 WAOK.